I also want to echo thanks to the AIM Foundation here and also to my wonderful colleagues who don't make dermatology feel like an orphan, which they sometimes are. So today I want to talk about prevention and screening because we are asked about that quite a lot. All right, so I don't have any conflicts of interest. And at the end of the session today, you should be able to discuss the FDA guidelines for sunscreen, identify sun protection measures other than sunscreen, and then be able to articulate the goal of a total body skin exam. So since I'm the first speaker, I get to use this first slide here. Why is it so important? Well, first of all, skin cancers in general is the most common cancers out of any organ system. Melanoma is a small part of that, but it's the only one type of cancer that is so small, it can be smaller than a dime that can kill a person. Now, there are some really great new drugs that are out there, and you'll hear more about it this morning, but really the key is still to catch it as early as possible, because if you can catch it early, then it's considered highly curable. So we do have a multidisciplinary team approach here, and I just put up this cartoon to show that we're really, really serious about taking care of you with this multidisciplinary team. So why are we talking about prevention? Well, there are so many different risk factors for melanoma, and I put up this list not so that you can read each and every one, but to show that the sun protection factor is considered fairly low risk, but it's the only thing that you can do anything about. You can't change your genetics. You still have to go to Thanksgiving dinner with your family. But you can actually do something about how you're exposed to the sun. So with prevention, those people in my role call two different kinds of prevention. One is primary prevention, and the other is secondary prevention. Primary prevention is to prevent it from coming up the first time. Secondary prevention is what we consider screening, so to really try to detect things as early as possible. We know that skin cancers in general are highly related to UV exposure. Melanoma is probably somewhat related to UV exposure also, but we also know that melanoma occurs where the sun doesn't shine. So it can't be just sun-related, and that's why the total body skin exam is so important. So there are multiple ways to protect yourself against the sun. The most common way, the most promoted way in the United States is actually using sunscreen. And I'll be honest with you, sunscreen is probably the hardest one to do. There are other ways of protecting against the sun, and that's with protective clothing and avoidance of the sun, either with your activities or with shade structures. And I always recommend my patients in using two modalities instead of relying just on one. The other thing to say is that I still have patients come into my clinic and talk about their use of a suntan lotion. That already tells me that you're not thinking the right way. There is no healthy tan, and we should not be trying to get tan. So we need to emphasize that really, really early in life. Unfortunately, our society, ever since Christy Brinkley, has been really emphasizing this so-called healthy tan look, which is so not true. So let's get started early with our kids, get them to use good sunscreens, sun protection behaviors. And then just a little note about the vitamin D. So there, unfortunately, was a message out to the health community about going out for 10 minutes of sun to get your vitamin D. For those of you who are at high risk for skin cancers, that is such a bad idea, because it's the cumulative exposure of sun that's going to put you at higher risk for skin cancers. So there are these yummy gummies that you can buy that are vitamin D supplements that you should just take instead, and forget about those 10 minutes of going into the sun. Now, in 2011, the FDA changed the regulation for how sunscreen should be labeled. And they did this really to make it easier for consumers to buy the right kind of sunscreen, but it also reflects the ability for sunscreen companies to test and therefore to reflect that in the labeling. So if you take a look at this brand X of sunscreen here, this is what they call their principal display panel. You should look for a couple of things. The first of which is that it says broad spectrum. If you see broad spectrum, then that means that it covers the whole span of the UVA and UVB spectrum. And so you don't have to worry about, in the past, you had to flip it over, look at the active ingredient, and I would write down a couple of the ingredients, and you had to make sure that it had it in there. No longer. You just, as long as you see broad spectrum, then it will cover the UVA part of it as well as the UVB. The numbering system, the SPF part, is what covers UVB exposure. And so now, really, anything beyond a 30, and if you really want to push it beyond a 50, is really not very much protection. It's like a curve that goes up. So if you're getting like an SPF 75, you're probably wasting your money beyond something that's an SPF of 30. So if it has at least an SPF of 30 and it has this broad spectrum, then it gets to have this label saying that it protects against early skin aging as well as the risk of skin cancer. If it doesn't have those two pieces, then it can't make that claim, and that's an FDA rule there. And you'll see it under the uses part of the panel. The other part of this was they addressed the whole business about whether it was waterproof. There's no such thing as waterproof. So now you will see that it is water resistant, and it's either going to be marked as 40 minutes or 80 minutes. Now, I'm going to show you these two brands here, and can anybody tell me why you shouldn't use this? Let's say this one to your left, the SPF is too low. And why wouldn't you pick this one here on the right? No broad spectrum. Very good. Okay, you've had your coffee. All right. One of my colleagues actually brought up a really good question. I'm not sure why they still sell things that are SPF lower than 30, and who buys those anyway? So that would be an interesting question for us to look at. Anyway, so if they don't meet those two criteria, you can see there that you can't actually make that claim. It says that this product has been shown to only protect sunburn, not skin cancer or early skin aging. So the FDA has been very, very particular about that. You can't promote that your product is going to protect against skin cancer if you don't have that. Now, again, I did say that sunscreen is really, really hard to use. People do a really good job with the first application. They squeeze out enough, and again, you need to have, for those of you who play golf ball size, for those of you familiar with a shot glass full of sunscreen to cover your entire body one time. If you are still pulling out a bottle of sunscreen that you used last year, you haven't been using enough. So you need to do it 20 minutes before you go into the water, before you play any sport, so that it can sink in. I recommend that people do it in an air-conditioned room. And then if you are active out and about, then you need to reapply it every couple of hours. Now, I often get the question about whether or not it's necessary to reapply sunscreen if it's just, your regular office day. So what I recommend is you go ahead, put a good layer on your exposed area, so definitely your face, and then ideally your arms if you're wearing short sleeves. If you're not in the type of occupation where you're going to be sweating it off, and especially women who wear makeup, I'm not so sure that you really, really need to reapply it, but this is where the second modality can be helpful. I'm also showing you some pictures here. There are more types of sun protection, sunscreen, than just the lotion type. So lotion, I think, has been the traditional one, but take into account that there are also sprays and also sticks. So I like the sticks a lot because they're much more portable than carrying around lotion. And so if you are, I don't know, about driving a golf cart, it'd be nice to be able to just rub a stick because you don't want to take off your whole shirt again to put on the sunscreen. So it'd be nice to have that stick. The spray is also nice. But remember, you're trying to apply enough of it so it looks like you're shellacking your skin. It's not a mist. It's not like hairspray. And one trick is for those of you who have light complected hair or maybe not so much hair, you might want to spray in those exposed areas also. Protective clothing, I think, is probably the easiest thing to do because you just put it on and you don't have to worry about it anymore. An SPF, I'm sorry, a white cotton T-shirt, an untreated white cotton T-shirt is only an SPF of 4. So you putting on a white cotton T-shirt is not going to be all that helpful, and you do have to think about another way of protecting yourself. So there are many companies, and I'm not promoting any particular one, who do make some protective clothing, and they have a system called UPF, and so you need a UPF of 30 or greater. But there are many outdoor companies now that also will sell these, and a lot of companies that make children's active clothing will also have these also. And these rash guards that the kids now put on before they go swimming are actually becoming quite popular and pretty stylish. So I do promote those. It was really funny. We were just driving yesterday, and this never happens, but my in-laws drove up in the car, and I saw my mother-in-law was wearing a tank top, but she had put on sleeves, just sleeves. They were different material, but she just put on sleeves to protect her arms in the car, for which she would remove when she went to her evening event. So good job, mother-in-law. The other thing is in seeking shade. So shade structures really should be parts of schools and should be a part of your life. And so you can carry your shade structure with you, and I'll show you a little bit about that. And then it's just avoiding outdoor activities when the sun is way overhead. So between 11 and 2, and I would argue in Atlanta sometimes it starts a little earlier and ends a little later as far as when the sun is overhead. But if you can do your running or whatever it is first thing in the morning or maybe in the evening, then that would be the best way to avoid direct sun. So we did a little interesting study about the social acceptability of handheld umbrellas. Some people call them parasols, but I think that makes it too feminine sounding. To see whether or not they were socially acceptable. And it was quite interesting initially, and we showed them this collage just to show them that there were celebrities and sports figures and whatnot that were using these umbrellas to protect them against the sun. And once we showed them this collage, it sure enough influenced people to think that this actually may be pretty cool to use. And so I think this would be a nice campaign to expand. And sure enough, I went to Disney a few years ago and I was really gratified to see that some umbrellas came out. So you can actually buy umbrellas that are made out of some protective fabric, but even, and this is the study that my resident, if you just take a regular rain umbrella, it actually will decrease the decrease the sun exposure by quite a bit. Oral sunscreen is also something that has come up. It's a pill that you can take. It has some promise, and so it can make you maybe less red. It's not something that I'm promoting, and I don't talk about this in clinic because I'm still not sure if there's DNA damage in the skin. All right, I'm going to go through this really quickly now because I only have 5 minutes, but there is some talk about chemo prevention of skin cancers. Unfortunately, the data are still controversial, and we don't have any prospective long-term studies. So what can you do to have better prevention steps? Have somebody be a reminder, make it part of your morning routine, put the bottle next to the door so you remember to use it, again, the sticks and the spray, and then using the clothing. Now, really quick through the screening part of things, what we look for is the ugly duckling, the one mole that totally stands out compared to the rest. And how do we do that? Well, we're really trying to see whether or not something's changed or if something is new. But how can you keep track of somebody who has so many different moles? That would be really hard to do, and these are completely useless to try to document like that. So in our dermatology clinic, we use photo body digital photography, and we have contracted with a particular company that will provide us with incredibly high resolution so that we can track them. There are other tools. Those of us who see me will know I take out this scope. It's called a dermatoscope that helps me figure out if something is worrisome and needs a biopsy or not, and those are some pictures that show that. There are some other devices that are coming out. The data are still out there, though, as far as whether or not they are really of good use. And just a plug-in for teledermatology, this is what we call remote screening, where there are these beautiful pictures that are taken by technicians where primary care doctors all the way up, let's say, in Blairsville, can send pictures of what they might deem suspicious to us down in Atlanta. This is a VA endeavor. And so we can then give feedback to both the imager as well as back to the primary care doctor so they can either reassure or not about whether or not something is worrisome. So for this particular veteran, we were able to take a look at his pictures, save him probably a day because we were able to figure it out in 5 minutes that this was what I call a beauty mark of age, something not to worry about. On the flip side, we got this person in really, really quickly because we did see a picture for which we were highly suspicious that it was a melanoma. So we've been quite successful in our VA effort. We see 400 consults a month, and we turn it around in one business day. And it sure would be nice to be able to do something like that in the civilian world. New technology that I consider promising are these total body cameras. That we can place a booth out in the community so that people can come in and get the body scans. This is still quite costly, but I think it's in the future, as well as teledermoscopy, where you can put the dermatoscope on an iPhone or some other Samsung or something so that there can be dermatoscopic images transmitted to the dermatologist, because those are what are really helpful for us to figure out what to do. So what can you do at home? I would suggest that you pick the same time of month every month to do your self-screening. If you have chosen to take those total body photos, you have access to them. They're on a secure cloud now, so to have a computer nearby in case you see something. Have a handheld mirror and a long mirror to take a look at it. Pick a partner to help you look at your back. Spouses aren't necessarily always your best partner because they're too vested in it. Make it a trade. You know, buy them a beer every month or breakfast or something so they can look at your back. What else can you do? Really get involved. I think that getting involved in tanning legislation is really important to do. Unfortunately, the 3 ways to get into Clifton campus, you can actually find a tanning salon, which is really a shame. Because people are now really starting to use the sun in very, very creative ways. And especially kids just really cannot imagine what it's like to be even 30 years old. So I do really strongly recommend that if you have capacity beyond yourself, to really think about getting involved in some of our campaigns. And that's what I have. Thank you very much.